so 20 some years of doing the jurying, I found that the same 25 people would probably make the finals. There are going to be 25, maybe more good people, but somewhere in the same 25 people would get down to the last sort of editing. But which 4 get invited is really dependent on the different jurors who've been invited in. Not always in the ways you'd expect. It's like you have them come in and you think, well, so-and-so is going to really love painting. And we're going to end up with a year of painters, which is fine with us. But instead, they'll be choosing what they feel is the strongest work, and it happens to be film, and so then we end up with filmmakers. So it's an interesting process.
Sure. And so it sounds like sometimes those jurors maybe have a speciality in one medium, but they have an immense appreciation for a different medium.
They do, and the truth is that the one thing we do is we try to pick jurors that we feel who can who are really smart and have a strong practice, art or in criticism or curation, but we feel will be able to be part of a discussion. It's a couple day process because to narrow it down, we get really great applicants, and to narrow it down and pick the right people, what we do then is just finalizing the process. We take a group of at least 8 ranked candidates if we have 4 positions, so that we have 2 for each one, and then we interview those people via Skype so that we have a sense of who they are and whether they'll fit in the group, because that's pretty critical to us. And so there are times when you get somebody who might be really gifted, but they just want to be left alone. And that doesn't work for us, because there's another program for them, and that doesn't, so that's the process.
Right. So you moved to Houston, and that is, it sounds like it's a great opportunity that is challenging a whole host of different ways than you have been challenged before that. You continue to make work. At what point did you buy the giant studio space?
In 1999, just before the biennial, but in August of 99, I bought the space. The Harry Gefford, who'd been casting all my bronzes out in Crowley, who recently passed away, he decided that he was going to close the sort of commercial end of it, and that he and his partner Linda Ridgway would be the ones casting out there, and that they would, that would be, he was retiring from doing it for more people. The person who had worked for him for quite a while, who actually had been a student of mine and my studio assistant, had left him a little before that decision was made and was living in Houston. His name is Ken King. And so Harry's closing. It's 2000. Suddenly there was a huge commission coming up that I could take if I could cast the piece, but I would have to have it local. And there were, because right after that the biennial happened, and there was just all this momentum around the work, and so it seemed like the time to take a risk to open a place that it's Ken's foundry. He leases, so it was an old church turned into a used auto parts place.
Wow.
And then vacated for 7 years. So it had a metal building that the foundry could go in. It had the church that could be part foundry, part my studio. And Ken leased the space for me, and then we did this first really enormous commission with all of the money essentially going to either repairing the roof on the building, which had holes in it with standing water when we first saw it, and doing the most minimal cleanup that we could in the building to get it ready to go, or it went into the foundry, or the down payment for the building, which I bought. Sure. And so the 3 of those things, we got that big commission, and that's how we started. So 99. And there was an interesting time because there was a lot of momentum around my work, and there was some interest from some places for me to, and offers for me to move, but it was just the out of Texas. but it happened to be that I just had gotten that building, and the building I was like, I'm not moving from a 7,000 square foot studio, right now, when I've just bought the damn thing.
Right.
So anyway, it locked me in there.
Right. Are those the sorts of issues that kept you in Texas?
Well, I think Texas has been really good for my work in certain ways. I think that probably continuing all the way back to when I was a very, very shy child, it's useful for me to be outside of things rather than, I need some community, but I don't know that, I used to consider and I have at times in my life gone to New York quite a bit, and I used to consider that as an option, or more recently I went through this transition where I thought, well, maybe I should. I now have two places. I live primarily in Houston, but I have a tiny little condo in San Francisco, and that I spend a little bit of time in, which is primarily a studio with a bed and a kitchen and a bathroom. But I love going there because it's a good space for me.
What neighborhood is that?
I'm on Telegraph Hill, just above, North Beach, but on the bay side, so I get a view of the Bay Bridge.
Sure.
I'm in an old house that it's in a combination of three old houses that are all condos, but my house has two condos in it, and a tiny little old house. And it's really awesome because it's basically gives me a place to read and think and draw and work on drawings. But when I had an earlier place in San Francisco, and then it came up that I was I had to get rid of it. And when I was thinking again about whether I would do something or not in another place, I thought, well, a lot of my friends who are artists were saying, dude, you got to get something in Brooklyn, and so I looked around a little bit, and then other friends were going, Los Angeles. And those would be better career moves, but I tend to draw a line between career and art practice, and I think it's better for me to operate outside of those things.
Sure.
So, that's that's what Texas has been good for. And there's smart people here, good people here, a really interesting, rich, history, and a kind of independence.
Sure.
So all those things combined are interesting.
Sure. Well, and part of what you said there, I feel like I see it in your work in that when I look at your body of work, it's obvious that you're not the type of person that has found a trick and keeps producing that over and over. That you are constantly challenging yourself and trying to find new ways to to present new ideas. I mean, it's almost as if every time someone wants to put you in a box,
I don't fit boxes very well.
Right.
It's true, and I probably some of that is is this. Some of it is I don't. Probably initially, some of it was resistance to being put in a box and taking this position that that's not central to the things I'm thinking about, and that as soon as it becomes signature, it loses its potency. Like, so back to the Dallas piece, I think I quit making those pieces when somebody said to me, "Oh, you're the chair guy," because all his pieces were chairs. And the last thing I ever wanted to be, because they used chairs, but they weren't about chairs, okay? So I didn't want to be the chair guy. Then I didn't want to be the collar guy. Then I don't want to be the drape guy.
Right.
I mean, I still use, and I wouldn't, actually, one of the things that's interesting now is I can come back to use any of those vocabularies as an idea demands it. But I don't want to be the person who has to make those over and over again.
So maybe we could touch on some of some of the work because there was originally the chairs, then there was a period when you looked at I guess what you would call virology, viruses, the influences there. And eventually we got to the body of work where in a lot of different ways you are utilizing white shirts. And so maybe we can talk a little bit about and I'll try to post pictures of different things so that folks can get an idea of what we're talking about. But what is the allegory that you were trying to tap into there?
Well, I mean, so the gesture before the allegory is so I went. Part of the struggle with my father being a real corporate guy and me not going into there was always work isn't impulse. Sometimes is only impulse. It's not that the work is that autobiographical, but there were certainly white shirts were something he had and was interested in and was flummoxed why I wasn't. And so then when I took the position at the Glassell School as the associate director that involved a certain kind of administration, being the punk rock Austin College professor, I remember thinking, for this, because I have to go to trustee meetings, I have to buy a white shirt. This is it. I'm going to have to buy a white shirt. So the first white shirt collar piece was simply, what I wanted was I was making a show and I wanted to acknowledge the white walls and acknowledge the convention of white as whiteness, both racially and as this kind of image of purity and having that we just took for granted. And I wanted to do it with I wanted to also include myself as to announce the fact that work that you might perceive as kind of autonomous or transcendent and actually had a kind of, myself as the watcher and as the author. Okay, so that I'm the author of you might have come in here to my little theater of works and bought the Kool-Aid, but I've created this as a kind of theater. This is a construct. It's not, it's not anonymous. It's not, and so your experience to some degree is being orchestrated by an agreement we have that you're going to come in, even if you're shocked or think it isn't art. We've had this agreement that you're going to come in here and be shocked, and here I am. So the first collar was posted just off the wall in one of those early collar pieces with the buttons going down and then a needle which I'd sewed the buttons on, and it was hung at my height of my collar. And it was hung near the door. There usually in those shows where there were two pieces. One was that, and one was what was called a seam. It was either threaded into the wall or a set of buttons in the wall that were embedded in the wall. So you'd have to consider the wall also a white vessel. The shirt was a white vessel. The wall was a white vessel. We're in here. You've bought the Kool-Aid. This is what we're going to do. I'm going to show you these things, and you're going to assign identity to them, but it is, and you might even think they're autobiographical, but this is simply my construction of something that creates a fiction. That's what I'm creating, a fiction for you. So in my case, probably a poetic fiction, not a direct narrative, but one that moves in an associative way. So that was the initial thing, and I did those for a while, and they took on other meanings, social meanings. I was in a lot of shows that looked at racial identity, where I often could be the only white or one of the few white people in those shows because they addressed that. In France, they were sometimes read. There's an article about them being in a French publication about them sort of representing disenfranchised workers, or the white male worker, disenfranchised middle class, which and all of that's fine, but but that was the lens they were often being read through. But I was trying to keep it in this place where they were all of those things and none of those things.
But I think it acknowledges. Some of that acknowledges, I think, what I heard you say in a talk before, which is that we think of white as being neutral, but
Right.
in essence, it's far from that.
Yes, and I did all my little research before I knew there was such a thing as a research-based practice.